Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. This is the weekly news wrap-up for January 31st, 2014, Friday. I have to go back to the Middle East for my top story. I just keep hearing this tapping of a war drum in my ear. Let's talk about the Syrian peace talks that happened in Geneva, Switzerland. They are a total bust, failure. Nothing good happened from the American perspective. The best you can hope for is that they'll agree to another round of talks. On the other hand, the Russians and the Syrians, they made out big time, especially the Assad regime that's in power in Syria. They averted war. The Russians came in when the U.S. was flooding the eastern Mediterranean Sea with our Navy and looking like we were going to flip over the war card. And because of the chemical weapons that allegedly the Syrians used, the other allegations that the rebels really used them to draw in the West, but neither here nor there. The Obama administration said, sure, we'll avoid war if you turn over the chemical weapons. This week, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel is opining about the fact that a little more than 4% of these chemical weapons have been turned over and or destroyed. Remember I told you how tough that was going to be, that back in the day, Gaddafi told the West, come on in and destroy these weapons. He hit a few out in the desert, but by and large, he destroyed or allowed the West to destroy his chemical weapons. By and large. Took them 10 years. They wanted to do this in a year. And they say they're getting up to the deadline. Well, they're not going to get much more than, 4 or 5%? It looks to me the Obama administration and John Kerry look pretty foolish. They look weak. They look disheveled. It's like, who's running foreign policy? Speaking of Syria, it appears that the civil war there, which, by the way, has killed more than 130,000 people and displaced 7 million across the border into places like Turkey. Well, because, Syria shot into Turkey, Turkish military attacked positions and caravans inside of Syria. They're attacking inside Syria. This shows you how the civil war is spilling not only outside the borders, but inside the borders as well. Nothing is settled. Nothing's being talked about peacefully. The war is raging on and could very well and is spilling outside and inside of Syria. Other fighters are coming in. There is no prospect for peace at the time. Keep an eye on Syria. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Middle East, it appears the Iranians have also made fools out of the Obama administration. I mean, we've been, this Iranian nuclear deal to curtail its nuclear program was ballyhooed, and it was supposed to be, great things, and we're on the way to curtailing that. No, we're not. We're not curtailing the program. That's what the Iranians say, and they're making public statements on the global stage about that. Late last week, the Iranian foreign minister said that the White House, quote, underplays the concessions and overplays the Iranian commitments. I mean, Obama, the president, brought this up in the State of the Union, how, we have to negotiate with the Iranians, and we negotiated with people much more powerful than the Iranians, I'm paraphrasing. That we can't trust them, but, we have to, give diplomacy a chance. It's not diplomacy. They're basically saying they're not going to do anything. That's what they're saying. And this is what the, people in the Senate on both sides of the aisle wanting to increase sanctions if they don't, come up with a real curtailment of their program, but that they are not saying any of that. They are overtly saying they're not going to curtail their program. They're almost daring us to do something. The West thinks the Iranians are going to have this nuclear program to get nuclear weapons. So does Saudi Arabia. They're worried about it. Saudi Arabia, remember, has bought nuclear weapons from Pakistan. The Iranians flatly deny that their program is for building nuclear weapons. They say it's for the peaceful production of energy. We shall see. The Federal Reserve pulled off a bit of a surprise this week. Once again, it tapered or cut back on the money printing that's propping up the stock market, the bond market, holding down interest rates, propping up the real estate market. They cut it back from $75 to $65 billion each and every month. That's how great the economy is. We're still pumping out. We think it's a great victory. They think it's a great victory to cut back to only $65 billion a month in money printing. That's a victory. You know, the President's State of the Union address, he basically bragged about the great economy. But then again, we just had recent numbers on what? Housing? Boing. Unemployment? Boing. Fed picked a bad time to start tapering. I will tell you that Gerald Celente, at the very first of the year, said they already tapered once, and he says they'll taper again. Then after that, they'll about face, and they'll start, pouring coals to the fire. John Williams at ShadowStats.com is predicting that kind of a scenario, that if the economy decreases, that the taper will stop, and they'll reverse course and increase it. I talked to my friend Gregory Mannarino about this taper, and he said that, well, listen, what they're doing is they're driving money out of the emerging markets because they're raising interest rates over there, and it floods back into the U.S., and it makes the economy look good. But in the near term, things are going to go well. That's what Greg Mannarino at TradersChoice.net says. He's a guest on the show, friend of mine. He said that's what they're doing, but this is going to blow up, he also adds. Yeah, he doesn't have any no preconceived conditions that, illusions that this is, a long-term fix. It's not. He says it's going to be terrible when it blows up. So does Doug Casey. Legendary Doug Casey, Casey Report, Casey Research. He came out this week on our show and said it's the bond market is the biggest bubble in the history of the world, and it is a bubble looking for a pin. A recent article by our friend Paul Craig Roberts says, well, the reason why they're tapering, they're worried about the dollar. They're worried about the value of the dollar and people selling dollar assets. They're a little late to the worry party. The rest of the world is already moving dramatically and consistently away from the dollar. But there's no talk about, in the State of the Union message, there's talk about this great economy, and then the president says, well, we need long-term unemployment benefits. What? I thought we had a great economy. And we need to raise the minimum wage. This is how you're fixing the economy? Not a word about all this debt we're incurring. I mean, they signed a 2-year budget deal, and nobody's talking about raising the debt ceiling. They're going to raise it a couple of 2-year deal. Well, you need at least $1 trillion. That's what we're looking at, $1 trillion a year. So at least $2 trillion, maybe $2.5 trillion. Another couple of $1 trillion. More debt. I mean, we're talking about the solvency of America here. You don't get solvent by going into debt at a clip of $1 trillion, $2 trillion. Really, the real encumberment, according to people like John Williams at ShadowStats.com, is $6.8 trillion in 2013. That's what we went on the hook for. The cash settlement was $680 billion, which that was phony jockeying of numbers. Jack Lew said that, in one of his statements recently that they cut the deficit in half. What? Come on. We're printing $65 billion a month. We have phony accounting since 2009 where the big banks can value these derivatives in the trillions of dollars on their books at, whatever they think they can get for them in the future. Just because you say something's worth something doesn't mean it's really there. It's an asset that it can really perform if you decide to cash it in. 0% interest rates as far as the eye can see. And it's a victory that we're only printing $65 billion each and every month to prop up the economy. The president also brought up with the State of the Union address this new IRA, the MIRA. My retirement account is what it stands for. MIRA, my retirement account. It wants to put people in the Treasury market. What? Haven't people on USA Watchdog, Doug Casey, Greg Mannarino, John Williams, all worried about the bond market bubble? And he wants to drive people into the bond market? And it pops, and what happens to their money? And could this be just nothing more than a first salvo into getting people used to, first by, asking them to get into the bond market and saying what a great deal is, and later by forcing them into the Treasury bond market? Could that be happening? Will that happen? I say the government's going to get pretty desperate if nobody wants to buy treasuries. I say it like, do you really think they're going to let the USS Kitty Hawk float up and down like a cork in the Arabian Sea if things get bad and they can't sell bonds and they just have money printing and the dollar goes to, to complete trash? No, I can't see that happening. Oh, you mean the country's going to be insolvent and you get to walk out of the casino with your IRA? I don't think so. Another big telltale sign about how the U.S. economy is really doing, and the president should have been talking about this, and this is a former World Bank chief economist, Justin Yi-Fu Lin. He said this last week, a dominance of the greenback is the root cause of global financial and economic crises. He also said, Lin, the former chief economist at the World Bank, he said the dollar should be replaced as the world's reserve currency. What do you think would happen to bond prices? Bonds would tank. Interest rates would go up. They would probably keep interest rates lower than the actual real rate of inflation like they did in the late 70s. Inflation would go up. Buying power of the dollar would tank. I mean, if there is if Saudi Arabia goes from from U.S. to a Chinese yuan dollar, not a petrodollar, or a yuan dollar petro, kind of thing, where you have a petrodollar and a yuan petrodollar, there's going to be problems, major problems for the U.S. dollar. I mean, this is why we can print money. People say, well, the dollar's not backed by anything. Oh, yeah, it is. It's backed by oil. Every country on the planet has to have, dollars to buy energy. And China is moving towards electric cars, totally electric cars. That's a big change that's coming up. Finally, have you heard about the bankers that are killing themselves in the UK? A Deutsche Bank banker hung himself. A JP Morgan banker threw himself off the 33rd floor in London. Think that's a coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. Isn't the global economy doing so great? Isn't that what we're hearing out of Davos? Isn't that what we're hearing every week in the newspaper? Recovery. We have a recovery. Oh, an uneven recovery. We have a recovery. And these guys are killing themselves? Huh. And last but not least, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan. I was talking about this last week, how in just 3 different incidents, Bernie Madoff, the London whale trade, and the mortgage security debacle, which the 2 of those, one of them they paid money to get rid of criminal charges. That was Bernie Madoff. Another one, their criminal charges are still pending. That's the mortgage-backed security debacle. They paid billions. All told, trading losses, fines, restitution, $23 billion. The market cap of LinkedIn, the market cap of Dell Computer. That's what they lost at JP Morgan. And they're giving Jamie Dimon a 74% raise. I guess if you lost $46 billion, they'd give him a 150% raise. That's absolutely outrageous. We live in a world, and this is sad to say, where bad is good and lies are the truth. That's the way I see it. I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for supporting the site with your comments. Thank you very much for supporting the site with your donations. Have a nice weekend.